Thank you for joining us today for the Value Proposition Workshop. I'm Lynette Bohannon.
And I'm Autumn Sullivan.
So Autumn, talk to us a little bit today about what we're going to be covering in the Value Proposition Workshop.
Great. We have 3 goals for you today. We want you to gain a deeper understanding of what a value prop is. We want you to be able to identify what a good value proposition looks like. And we want to help you craft an effective value proposition for your organization.
Fantastic. All right, so let's start at the top, right at the beginning. What exactly is a value proposition?
A value proposition is often mistaken for a tagline, but it's very different. A value proposition introduces your brand to your potential customers. It describes how your product or solution solves a specific pain point in their lives. It also introduces a gain point, something they're getting, or the cash and prizes. And it has a unique statement about your brand that your competitors simply cannot say.
So what I hear you saying is that value propositions literally reveal function and how it solves a customer's pain point. It's written from the customer perspective, not from the business perspective, right?
That's exactly right.
Okay, so audiences live in a world of distraction. I mean, we've all seen the different stats out there, how we're bombarded with our phones, with our email, with direct mail. There's a million different ways that our customers are getting our messages, right? How do you use a value proposition to help cut through some of that noise and really resonate with your audiences?
Your value prop should be the drumbeat that your sales and marketing march to. It is the encompassing overall message that should be infused through all of your other marketing assets. So the repetition and the unique value statement and the focus on the customer really make you stand out among the competition, and it makes you memorable to your customers.
Okay, so now that we know what a value proposition is, let's talk a little bit about what a value proposition is not.
Great. So one defining characteristic of an effective value proposition is that it is literal. A good value proposition describes your company's function, how it benefits your clients and your customers. That makes it very different from an aspirational tagline or your very organization-focused mission statement.
Terrific. So now that we know what a value proposition is and is not, let's talk a little bit about the characteristics of a strong value proposition. What does that look like?
Okay, so a strong value proposition, for starters, isn't a static message. It is a continuous evolution. As your business grows and changes, your value proposition will grow and change. Also, you have multiple personas that you market to. You will have multiple value propositions.
So let's talk a little bit about personas. What exactly is a persona and how many personas do you typically work with?
A persona is an amalgamation of key characteristics and data about your ideal customers. It is not a single best customer. It is more of a mosaic, if you will, of data about your customers.
So in the technology field, you might have personas that are what? A CIO, a CTO, a CEO, a line of business leader. Are those some good examples of what we might find?
Absolutely. Within the buyer's journey, you have an end decision maker, but you have multiple decision makers along the way. And the larger the organization you're marketing to, most likely the more decision makers you have. Each one of them should have their own persona and their own value proposition.
So let's take a break right now and get to work on our first exercise, which is on personas. Autumn, why don't you tell them a little bit about what that would be?
Our first exercise is around identifying your personas. Who are they within their organization? What is their role? What is their primary pain point? What is their primary gain point or ambition or driver? How can your product or solution solve their problem and help them reach that gain point?
Terrific. All right, guys, we'll see you in a few.
Welcome back. How'd you do? Does your persona have a specific role within the organization? Do they have a primary pain point? Do they have a gain point? And have you identified how your product or solution solves that pain point and achieves their gain?
Now let's look at some examples of companies that absolutely nailed their value propositions and why they nailed them. First up is what? Slack?
Slack's value proposition is Slack saves time by tearing down communication and system silos. It is a place where your team comes together to collaborate, important information can be found by the right people, and your tools pipe in information when and where you need it. That's a mouthful.
Sure it is. Okay, so let's break it down. Why is this a terrific example of a value prop?
Let's think about it from the persona's perspective. If I am the CEO of a company, and one of the pain points that I'm experiencing is that my teams are having a hard time communicating with each other. This is very true in software development, right? You end up in these little silos and you have to find an effective way to collaborate across teams. Slack, the very first line is tears down communication and system silos. It opens up communication. Pain point resolved.
So it's functional.
Absolutely. And it addresses the gain point, right? Slack very quickly adds in those cash and prizes. Your team comes together to collaborate. That's a great buzzword, right? That's what everybody is shooting for. Important information can be found by the right people. It's saying everything that I, as the buyer, need to hear in order to click that button.
Okay, terrific. Now let's take a look at another example. This time it's Airbnb. What does their value proposition look like and why do you think it's so good?
Yeah, Airbnb is my favorite value proposition example. Here is their value prop. Airbnb exists to create a world where anyone can belong anywhere, providing healthy travel that is local, authentic, diverse, inclusive, and sustainable.
What are they telling their customers and how does that resonate with their personas?
Think about the Airbnb persona. It is a person who loves to travel, but always likes to feel like a local. That is exactly what Airbnb says in the first line of its value prop. Create a world where anyone can belong anywhere.
Now let's look at an example that might seem like it's a value proposition, but it's really more of a tagline. And we're going to turn to Apple in this case.
The value proposition for Apple's new iPhone that covers 5G is high, speed. It's very clever, but is it really communicating a solution to a pain point for a specific persona?
You know, it's hard to say. This is why taglines and value propositions are so often confused, right? The example here with Apple, it is clever. It does sort of address a pain point because what they're trying to say here is high speed like tech, high HIGH speed, but also high speed like hello, because now their new phones are going to be supporting 5G technology. So it kind of answers a pain point, but it's really more form than function, in my opinion.
Exactly. And I think this is a great example of how your value proposition should inform your marketing. If a value proposition was to say, more specifically about the function, we provide a phone that does XYZ, when you filter that down throughout your marketing, you will end up with a tagline that is clever and still speaks to the pain point. But the value proposition does more than just address the pain point, right? It talks about a solution, and then it talks about a gain point, what you get out of it, and then it makes a unique statement that your competitors simply can't claim. Almost all phone companies are going to talk about how fast their new phones are.
So what I hear you saying is that value propositions are inherent to your business.
Absolutely. They have to be true to you. Another great characteristic of a strong value proposition is that they address your customer's pain point. And this is where a lot of brands get stuck. They want to talk about themselves, but value propositions really need to be persona focused. So it's about the customer's pain point and what the customer gains by using your solution.
Okay, so let's recap what we've discussed so far today. We've talked about understanding what a value proposition is. We've talked about what a value proposition isn't. We've talked about characteristics that define a strong value proposition. And we've taken a look at some examples of good value propositions, as well as one example that might be perceived to be a value proposition when in fact it's really more of a tagline. Okay, so now we need to move to the next phase, which is crafting your value proposition. Your value proposition should answer 4 key points. Tell them what they are.
Is it concise? Is it clear? Is it specific to your core customer organization, your core persona? Is it unique? Is it something your competitors simply cannot say?
Each value proposition needs to tie to your persona. So each point should underscore a different pain point specific to that person, whether it's a line of business leader, a CIO, a CEO. Each one of them will have very, very different goals and objectives that align with their business.
A persona for every stakeholder and a core value proposition for every persona.
Exactly. And that's why you need to test your value proposition against these different personas, because the core value proposition isn't going to change dramatically. It's just going to be a nuanced change that's going to be very relevant and very meaningful to that person, whether it's a line of business leader, whether it's a CEO, whether it's a CTO. Each persona has a very different goal and objective that they're tasked with, they're focused on. I mean, if you bring it in-house to your own personal business, right, and you are responsible for a particular practice area, you're going to be less concerned with another aspect of the business. So think about it from that standpoint. We're all consumers. We all are buyers. We all transfer through the buying journey. And so it's helpful if you try to connect in that way to know what is meaningful to you isn't necessarily meaningful to someone else, and take it from there.
That's a great point, Lynette. You know, one of the things that I recommend is that folks take a brand that they love, that they trust, and work backwards. Why did you choose that brand? What is unique about that brand? What do you trust? Write a value proposition for a solution that you actually bought.
What would make you deviate from that brand? We all have very strong, passionate loyalty to certain brands. And in many cases, it's going to take a heck of a lot to make us move from that brand. And that is what you want to focus on as you're building your value proposition. How do you build that relationship, have that one-on-one connection with each buying decision maker?
A value proposition is an overarching promise. A core brand message is how you make that promise. It's the story that you tell to your customers. It's the vocabulary and the keywords you're going to use to effectively communicate your message and make sure it resonates with your potential customer. Let's look at a brand message like a story you tell your persona. You need to identify their challenge or their quest right away. That's their pain point. You then need to tie it to an emotional trigger: stressful, frustrating, something like that. Then you need to identify what they will get at the end of this quest. That's your gain point. You need to identify yourself as the guide who's going to give them the map that gets them to that happy ending. Think of it like this: your customer is Luke Skywalker, you're Yoda. Finally, you need to tell them how they're going to feel at the end of the journey. If they were frustrated at the beginning, they need to feel relieved. If they were feeling insecure at the beginning of their journey, they need to feel confident.
That's awesome, Autumn. I love the whole Luke Yoda analogy. It's super cool. But I think what's really important here is brand authenticity, right? Just because you're relating a message out to your prospective customers isn't necessarily how they're perceiving it. Perception is reality. It doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter what you do, how you do it. It's how your customers perceive what you say and what you do. So it's really critical that you listen to your customers in every fashion that you can, whether it's phone calls, whether it's emails, whether it's at events where you hear what people are saying. It's important to listen to the ways that your customers are reacting to your brand.
I think that's a really great point, Lynette, and can't be understated. The last thing I would say about a core brand message is that it should have a call to action. It should have a driving statement that makes your customers want to get up and do something.
Terrific. Okay, so let's take another break and do a quick exercise on developing your core brand message. We'll see you in a few.
Welcome back. Did you find the droids you're looking for?
Awesome. Okay. You're sticking with your brand message. I love it. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about creating your core brand message. We just did that exercise, right? So your core brand message should be short. It should be what you would say to your persona. It's going to include a call to action, and it's going to be developed on persona-based storylines, right? You needed to define your hook. Your hook. What is that key point that you want to underscore? And then you need to test your core brand message often, because remember, we talk about value propositions are an evolution. They're not a static, set it, forget it type of content, right? It is core to your brand. It is written from the customer perspective, and it is evolving.
So far, we've developed your value proposition and your core brand message. But these days, clients want to know who they're doing business with, which means you need to know who you are as a business. And that is where core values come in.
Exactly. So which values uniquely define a business? These are some of the questions that you need to ask yourself. How are they different from your competitors? What do you do better than your competitors, and why? And what do your customers say about you? These are some of the key points, important questions that you need to ask yourself, reflect on before you can define your business values.
Think of your organization like a person. How would you describe them? If you need to break out a thesaurus, go ahead. It's really helpful to get a specific term. Loyal means different things to different people.
Exactly.
So this example might seem a little dated, but I want to show you some core values. They look pretty good, right? Here's the thing though. Those are Enron's core values. Ouch, right? This is what happens when core values are created from leadership, but they aren't true. And they're put on the wall or they're put in the onboarding packet, but nobody's actually living them. Core values have to be core values. They have to come from inside you and inside all of your employees. They have to be things that you agree on because, again, they are the personality, the makeup of your organization.
That's that authenticity point that we were trying to make earlier.
Absolutely. Bang the drum. It has to be authentic. Your value proposition has to be authentic. Your core brand message has to be authentic. And your core values have to be authentic.
Because you're not going to fool anyone. People, it goes again back to that perception. People are going to see beyond the words and look at the actions.
That's exactly right. You can take as many of these workshops as you want and do all the exercises and all the templates. But if you are not looking inward and being true about who you are, it's just another marketing gimmick. And it ultimately won't work. So
that comes to the point where your value proposition, your core brand values all have to adhere under stressful situations. Will the value prop, will the core brand message be upheld when the pressure's on?
Absolutely. Who you are when you're under fire is probably the most important thing about who you are.
And you know what? We have an exercise in the workbook for that. So let's get to it.
Let's review. A value proposition introduces your company to potential customers by describing how your product or solution solves a pain point and achieves a gain point. You will have multiple personas and multiple value propositions. They should roll up to your organizational value proposition statement. Core brand messages define how you communicate your value proposition to your customers. And core values define your organization and set the expectations for your customers. So this is a lot of information to cover in a very short period of time, and value propositions can't be done very quickly if they're done well. You need to take a lot of time, a lot of introspective thought into all of these things that we discussed today. Consider how they work authentically with your individual organization and evolve over time with your business. So if you find that this is something that you need a little more help than the workshop that we've conducted today, we have more support for you. And if you check the link at the end of this video, we'll help you sign up for additional support. Thanks for joining us today.